Welcome back to I guess we're talking about now segment 3 on chapter 3. And we're going to talk about the LMX dilemma. And what the text is more concerned about on the LMX dilemma is what occurs with the outgroup and how do you try to mitigate that? Outgroups tend to occur. They're not desirable, but it's hard to get around the fact that most leaders, I don't even want to say somewhere along the way, I think most leaders invariably have some individuals that slide into that outgroup. And that's the dilemma that you as a leader in this leader member exchange, it's going to be tasked. How are you going to mitigate that? As we've talked, before, they're marginal performers, negative organizational impact in a lot of instances. If you're not making your financial goal because of, the group and that the followers that gravitate to the outgroup, it could definitely be impacting the financial goals of the organization as a whole. Not only the financial goals, but just the work environment. If you've got several in that outgroup, I could see it getting into a toxic work environment. And those are things that are just not conducive to a great organizational behavior. They talk in the text about one bad apple can spoil the entire bunch, and that's true to a certain extent. They harm the dynamics of the team, especially the in-group members. I mean, individuals, and I've worked in teams multiple places where, I'd be in the in-group and you'd have individuals that, other leaders or other vice presidents that, working for the next, same supervisor that I happen to be working for. And, I'm in there working, I get to work at 7 o'clock and I may work till 5 or 6. And you see these characters come strolling in at, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. You see them going home like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's just not good. It's just not good team dynamics. And you don't want it to impact your in-group, especially if you've got a group of either directors or managers reporting to you. You don't want it to start impacting them, because you need some strong leaders in that next level down of your management hierarchy in the functional area that you're trying to build the team camaraderie and manage to meet those goals. So you've got to have as many in that in-group and working together as you possibly can. And it's the leader dilemma, because at some point you as a leader have to accept responsibility for the number of individuals you've got in that outgroup. And it goes back, to that leader follower context. Is there something in that the way that's integrated, and it could be for no other reason, it's the context that's driving it. It's a situation that's driving these individuals into this outgroup. I've worked at a couple of, health plans where the salary structure and the pay scale and the level of bonuses just was not conducive to keeping people happy. And you found that it was the organization that was driving them into that outgroup. It wasn't necessarily anything that you could control or you had any, especially you couldn't change the salary structure no matter how many people you talk to. So basically, it's kind of out of your control, and it was organization driving people into that outgroup. And no matter how hard you work, you're just going to have some individuals in that outgroup. And when it comes to especially tangible assets, I've noticed over maybe the last 5 to 7 years, dynamics in the workplace are really changing. You've got individuals coming out of college and they talk about instant gratification, and they're looking for bumps in salary and increases and more PTO, more vacation time, maybe more time off, maybe more holidays. I mean, their I guess benefit expectations have been changing a lot over the last few years. And when we're talking about the outgroup, as I mentioned earlier, they could just be a bad fit. And maybe you move them into another area or another, especially functional area of your company, and they may become very productive employees. It's just, they just didn't happen to be a good fit for your vision or your strategy. And if you've got, bad performance reviews, you can, so we mentioned earlier, you can implement a corrective action plan, a CAP. You can set it up. I've had to set individuals up in the past to meet with them every Monday, Wednesday, Friday morning when they first got in, to give them their direction for that day. And I've had some individuals I had to meet every morning at 8 o'clock just to give them direction and make sure they were on task. But unfortunately, as a leader, especially if you've got a lot of individuals reporting to you, it's really difficult to spread yourself that thin and trying to manage this outgroup. The outgroup tend to be, and as I mentioned earlier, they tend to be more prevalent with inherited resources. They're the individuals that will tell you, well, it's not broke, I'll fix it, or well, that's just the way we've always done it. Why can't we just continue to do it that same way? Used to doing things a certain way, you have your own leadership style and your own vision and your own strategy, and you roll it out. And there's some individuals that will just never get on board with you. And the out group, it's really important to determine, is it a leader driven out group? Is it a follower driven out group? And again, look at is it an organizational driven output and out group, something that you just don't have the control over. And they talk, the text, goes into some details about how to mitigate the out group. They talk about the love philosophy, and the love philosophy, I've tried that in the past, and it does reasonably well, mitigating the number of individuals you have in the out group. But there's some individuals that they're in that out group, they're going to stay in that out group, and I've had some in the past that I just couldn't change. It just didn't work that way. Then you think about, how to keep followers from slipping in the out group, and they had 3 or 4 remedies in there, and it actually made some sense. It's to me they're pretty common sense, but if you haven't heard them in the past, it's like, don't play favorites. It's somewhat difficult, at least the perception of playing favorites in an organization, because you do tend to gravitate to those high producers. Monitor the out-group formation, understand the needs of your followers. I think we all try to do that. It's just some that maybe they're just a little more needy than others, and you just don't have the time and the resources to manage them all on a one-to-one basis. Remedy the situation of out-groups forming. One of the things that I've always used, and it's worked extremely well, is you set definitive, measurable goals for everybody. Everybody has the same goals. Everybody on a team has the same goals. They are black and white metrics. Here's your financial goal. It's X number of dollars. We either hit it or you don't. And, you've got a financial goal again, your meets goal, your exceeds goal, your stretch goal. If they're financial, they're driven by dollars. If they are process improvements, they're driven by a number of process improvements. The meets may be 4 process improvements a quarter, and the exceeds may be 8, and the stretch may be 12 a quarter, or some combination of numbers. But as long as you're setting definitive goals and measurable goals, and everybody on the team's got the same goal, it's really hard for individuals in that out group or to slip into that out group, because you're paying favorites. People are either hitting them or they're not hitting them. And I've always been a firm believer in, monthly, quarterly evaluations. You'd like to see them done monthly, quarterly at an absolute minimum, but you want everybody to understand where they stand, not only with team goals, but where they stand with their personal goals. And again, you don't want any surprises at the end of the year, because if you're meeting at least on a quarterly basis and doing evaluations with your direct reports, you're not setting them up for failure, because they know exactly where they stand, on those quarterly evaluations. And then the authors go into, what if followers don't reciprocate? And that's always an issue, no matter how you try to manage and how you try to manage away from the out group or manage into the in group, some just don't reciprocate. Good followers perform to the best of their ability, don't shrink added responsibility. They're the individuals that stick their head in your office and said, hey, can I help you? Is there something I can take off your plate to help you out? They're punctual, they're conscientious, they're loyal to the leaders. They don't undermine strategy of a leader. And I don't have anybody, I've never had any employee that questioned the strategy that I've put forth, or the mission, or what we're working toward as far as to go. But if they question the strategy, give me some information, give me some data points that will help me understand why they question the strategy. They can't come in and say, well, I just don't like the strategy. I need some data points. I need some information. I'll definitely sit down and talk to them. And after some discussions in the past, I've actually changed goals, changed the way they were structured, changed the value of the metrics, because they've been able to put together a convincing argument based on data points and information that I'd overlooked, or maybe I just hadn't thought about. So that's, I don't have a problem with questioning strategy, but just don't try to undermine it just because you don't like it. And they made a comment somewhere in the text, the authors put it forth, that unless leaders engaging in some sort of unethical, unsafe, or unproductive act, then you should exhibit loyalty to your leader. And if they don't, then they talk about getting into the whistleblower. So, and I've been in companies before that you had issues with whistleblowers. Some of them make sense. I've been in companies before, and you have whistleblowers, and when you start to, peel back the onion and look at their case, there wasn't any whistleblower case to start with. It's just they didn't like the strategy, they didn't like the mission of a potential leader or a particular leader, and their way to get around having to work with them is to open a whistleblower case, because once they open a whistleblower case, they knew there wouldn't be any retaliation or abuse. So they opened as a whistleblower, and it was a case with no basis. So and that's difficult for any leaders when somebody opens a case with no basis on you like that. And the authors get into context is key in the leader-follower relationship. Leaders may not be aware of the LMX dilemma. I've been in organizations where you're managing people, and I've had unhappy individuals and didn't realize it. Nobody, they seemed happy on the surface, but there was just this underlying unhappiness that they didn't exhibit any, there were no signs that told me that they were unhappy. You can go to training to assist leaders in understanding their own biases and stylistic preferences, and you can train leaders to work with that in group versus the out group. One of the ways they talk about having, mitigating that is, the staffing process can help prevent the LMX dilemma. I don't know that as we kind of go down this road, you talk about, and I guess it's always been the type of teams I've managed. Economist by training, analytical, spent most of my career in medical informatics, medical economics, payment integrity, which again is very analytical based, and operational side of the house, again analytical based. Did spend some time in network management, which is more of a relation building when I had those teams. But for the most part, mine has been based on technical skills, experience versus fit of the team, because you don't, in certain types of teams, you don't need as much team building that I think that you do in others. Again, it goes back to the context, and when you're talking about the leader follower context, persons and organizations fit tends to produce out group. It tends to produce these out-group memberships, because if the person's just not a fit on the team, again, they may be a great fit somewhere else in the organization, some other functional area, they're just not a fit for your team. And they talk about that if you can, and over the last 3 or 4 places I've worked, develop when we do an interview process to either backfill or you're filling a new FTE that you've been able to justify. I've always viewed that kind of and I call them the interview panel process. So, I usually sit on the panel, HR, somebody from HR sits on the panel. I've got some team members interviewing, and I've kind of done it, a couple of different ways. One, offloaded it to some of individuals that wanted some experience in management, and you give them the opportunity to pick 2 or 3 team members and sit down and kind of do your screening interviews. And I wouldn't even ask any questions during the interview. I would just be there as an observer and just to watch the process that they would go through. And it's a great leadership building opportunity, especially for an interview process opportunity for individuals that are wanting to move up through that corporate ladder. But the final interview process, I found that it's helpful to have an HR person in there, because while I tend to focus again on the technical expertise, the skill set, and somebody from HR, it's a good balance, even though they probably lean more toward the team fit side of the house. It's always a good balance to have somebody from HR in there. There's always potential danger, and the authors talk about this, potential danger in too much person organizational fit. You end up getting a lack of diversity if you're not careful. They talk about, I guess they talked about groupthink, where you have individuals that they only want to bring people on the team that think like they do. And that's not always, you want some diversity, especially diversity in thought. You want diversity as you build out your team. So sometimes groupthink drives an issue. I think over the last 2 or 3 years, especially, there may have been in some organizations, and at least some of my peers I've discussed these situations with, too much of a focus on team fit. So too much of a focus on team fit, and organizations are starting to lose sight of the financial goals, the productivity goals, the organizational goals, or what their true vision and strategy is. So a lot of times in these, leadership seminars and leadership concepts, things kind of what comes around goes around, and they kind of cycle back and forth. So who knows how this is going to cycle, but I think organizations, especially those that are equity-based, maybe looking at outfits like, Disney and outfits like, especially on the marketing side, like, Bud Light, you're talking about, or Target, the issues with and earnings per share. I mean, if I have stock in a company, whether it's Disney or Ambev that owns, Anheuser-Busch, and I see these kind of decisions being made, I'm not a real happy camper if my stock, if my dividends start tanking or my stock price starts tanking. So I think you're going to get enough push from shareholders that are looking for earnings per share, or looking especially, at your retirement account, where you've got money tied up, to build for your future retirement. And it's being to some extent mismanaged by these corporations. So I think you may see things start to switch back as we go forward. It's kind of hard to tell right now, but there does seem to be kind of a shift back toward definitive goals and being driven by financial goals and productivity goals and organizational type goals. That's going to kind of wind us up for that third segment, and we'll come back and kind of wind up Chapter 3, we're going to talk just a few minutes about political savvy. So thanks for joining, and I'll see everybody to try to wind this up in a few minutes. Thank you.